Missouri, September 1884. Ladder cuts through the parlor like shattered glass. Marin Hartley doesn't need to look up to know who they're laughing at. 24 years in this house has taught her that. She is the joke. She has always been the joke. In the shadows by the window, she stands frozen, listening to her three beautiful sisters plot something cruel. About a letter, about a man far away in Colorado. About a vicious game where she will be the final punchline. But they don't know what they're about to give her. They don't know that desperation can transform into courage, that humiliation can crack open the door to freedom, that the plain, forgotten daughter will board a train heading west, not to be humiliated, but to be reborn. This is the story of a woman sent away as a joke, who became the love of a lifetime. This is the story of lies that led to truth, of pain that birthed hope, of finding beauty where no one ever looked, not even herself. Missouri, September 1884, the Bennett farmhouse porch creaked under Marin's weight. She didn't look up from her mending, didn't need to. The laughter from the parlor told her everything. Vivienne's voice, sharp as cut glass. "Oh, this is wicked, absolutely wicked," Cordelia giggled. High and bright, Mother would faint if she knew. Mother doesn't need to know. That was Lillian, always the bold one. Besides, it's harmless fun. Marin's needle paused, mid-stitch. Her sister's fun was never harmless, not for her. Read it again, Viv. The part about modest beauty. More laughter. Marin set down her mending basket. Moved to the window. Stayed in the shadows. Inside, her three sisters clustered around the dining table like conspirators. Which they were. Vivienne held up a newspaper. The Missouri Gazette, rancher seeking bride. She read it like a theater performance. Widower, age 36, owner of extensive mountain ranch in Colorado Territory. Seeking woman of gentle nature, modest beauty, and strong character for marriage. Must be willing to relocate. Serious inquiries only. She lowered the paper. Eyes gleaming, can you imagine? The man must be desperate or ancient. Cordelia leaned forward. 36. Practically grandfather age. Who cares how old he is? Lillian tapped the newspaper. Father heard about mountain ranchers from his business associates. They're all rough, uncivilized, living in log cabins with bears. Then it's perfect. Vivienne's smile turned cruel. Perfect for dear Marin. Silence. The kind that precedes disaster. You're not serious. Cordelia's voice held a note of delicious scandal. Oh, but I am. Vivienne pulled out a writing pad. Think about it, Marin, 24 years old. Never been courted, never will be. Father's greatest disappointment. Vivienne, that's cruel. Even for you. But Cordelia was already laughing. Is it? Or is it genius? Vivienne warmed to her theme. This rancher wants modest beauty. Well, Marin is certainly modest. In every possible way, Lillian added. They erupted in giggles. Marin stood frozen at the window. 24 years of this. 24 years of being the joke, the plain one. The one who didn't inherit mother's golden hair, or father's strong features. Just, ordinary brown hair. Two large eyes. A thin frame that never curved in the right places. Nothing. She was nothing. How would we even do it? Cordelia asked. Simple. Vivienne was already writing. We fill out the application in her name. Father has that daguerreotype from last year, the one where she's squinting. Makes her look even worse than usual. And when Father finds out, by then it'll be too late. Vivienne didn't look up from her writing. The rancher will have responded. Or he won't. Either way, it's done. Read what you're writing, Lillian demanded. Vivienne cleared her throat. Dear Mr. Thorne, I am writing in response to your advertisement. I am a woman of simple background, raised on a farm in Missouri. I understand hard work and the demands of rural life. I am seeking a fresh start in the West, a chance to build something meaningful. I believe I could be a good partner to you and a good mother to your child. She paused. How does that sound? Perfect. Cordelia clapped her hands. Earnest but not desperate. Just pathetic enough to seem genuine. They laughed again. Marin backed away from the window. Her heart hammered against her ribs. hard enough to crack them. She should storm in there, should confront them, should tear up that letter and tell Father what they'd done. But she didn't, because underneath the humiliation, underneath the hurt, something else was growing, something dangerous. Hope. What if the thought formed before she could stop it? What if this rancher actually responded? What if he was desperate enough, or foolish enough, or kind enough to accept her? What if she could escape? This house where she'd always be the disappointment. Escape mirrors that showed her everything she wasn't. A glimpse of the future she could see stretching ahead. Clear as glass, cold as winter. Becoming the spinster aunt, living in the attic. Helping raise other women's children. Withering into invisibility. No, she turned away from the window. Walked to her small bedroom under the eaves. And she didn't say a word. 6 weeks passed. Autumn settled over Missouri like a wool blanket, heavy and gray. Maren went about her days in silence, mending, cooking, tending the chickens, being invisible. Her sisters forgot about their joke. Moved on to other entertainments. Maren didn't forget. She waited every day when the post arrived. She waited, watching, not daring to hope, until the Tuesday morning when Vivian's shriek cut through the house like a knife. Oh my God. Oh my God, it actually worked. Maren was in the henhouse, gathering eggs. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the basket. By the time she reached the house, her father stood in the dining room, Thomas Hartley, solid, stern. A man who measured worth in productivity and profit. Maren. His voice was controlled. Come here. She set down the egg basket. Walked into the room on legs that felt like water. All three sisters stared at her. Vivian's face had gone pale. Cordelia looked sick. Even Lillian seemed uncertain. It seems, Father said slowly, that you've been corresponding with a gentleman in Colorado Territory. The floor tilted. What? Don't play games. He held up a thick envelope. A Mr. Ezra Colton Thorne, owner of a ranch in the mountains. He has accepted your proposal of marriage. The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. I didn't. The letter is quite clear. Father's eyes narrowed. You applied to be his mail-order bride. He has accepted. He sent train fare and travel instructions. He thrust the envelope at her. Maren took it with numb fingers, inside heavy paper. Bold handwriting, black ink that looked like it had been pressed hard into the page. She read, Dear Miss Hartley, I received your letter and photograph with interest. I will be direct because I don't believe in false promises. I am not a romantic man. I lost my wife 5 years ago, and I learned that love brings as much pain as joy. What I need now is not romance, but partnership. Ray, my ranch covers 3,000 acres in the Colorado mountains. It's hard country, beautiful but unforgiving. Winters are brutal, the work never stops. My son Josiah is 4 years old and has not spoken since his mother died. The doctors say it's trauma. I need someone who can care for him, teach him, be patient with his silence. I need someone who can manage a household, keep accounts, make decisions when I'm working the far pastures. I need a partner, not a decoration. Your letter spoke of understanding hard work, of wanting to build something meaningful. That matters more to me than beauty or charm. I am enclosing $200 for train passage to Red Mesa, Colorado. If you find these terms acceptable, send word immediately. I will meet you at the station on the 15th of October. The choice is entirely yours. I make no promises except these. I will treat you with respect, provide for you, expect honesty in return. If that is enough, come. If not, keep the money and forget this letter. Respectfully, Ezra Colton Thorne. Maren read it twice. 3 times. The words didn't change. Well? Father's voice cut through her shock. What do you have to say for yourself? She looked up, met his eyes. For the first time in her life, she saw something other than disappointment there. Calculation, maybe. Or relief. When did you plan this? He wasn't asking. He was accusing, behind my back. Writing to strange men. I didn't. The words came out steady, stronger than she felt. But I'll go. The room erupted. What? Vivian's voice cracked. Marin, don't be ridiculous. Cordelia moved forward. It was just. We didn't think. You didn't think what? Marin turned to face her sisters. That he'd actually respond? That I'd actually go? She looked at each of them. These women who'd spent 24 years making sure she knew her place. Thank you. The words tasted strange, truly. You gave me something I never could have managed alone. What? Lillian whispered. A way out. Marin turned back to her father. This gentleman has made me an honorable proposal. If you'll permit it, I'll accept. Thomas Hartley studied his daughter for a long moment. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded. Very well, it's unusual. But the man appears to be of good standing. I'll make the arrangements, but father. Vivian started. Enough. His voice cut like steel. Your sister has received an offer of marriage from a respectable man. That's more than I dared hope at her age. He left the room. Marin stood there, holding the letter, feeling 3 sets of eyes burning into her back. You're actually going to do it. Cordelia's voice was barely audible. Marry a stranger? Yes, but you don't even know him. He could be horrible, cruel, ugly, or honest. Marin met her sister's gaze. Which is more than I can say for anyone here. She walked past them, up the stairs to her small bedroom under the eaves. Only when the door was closed did she let herself look at the letter again. The choice is entirely yours. Was it though, really? She was choosing between humiliation, here and the unknown there, between slow suffocation and a leap into darkness. Some choice, but as she sat on her narrow bed, as September sunlight slanted through the small window, something unfamiliar stirred in her chest. Not hope, not quite, but possibility, the sense that her life, which had seemed so firmly set in its disappointing pattern, had suddenly cracked open. She pulled her grandmother's trunk from under the bed, old leather. Brass hinges inside, her few possessions, dresses, all hand-me-downs from her sisters, a hairbrush with missing bristles, 2 pairs of shoes, and wrapped in a yellowed handkerchief, her grandmother's music box, small, wooden, painted with faded flowers. The only beautiful thing she owned, the only heirloom that had come to her, instead of to her prettier sisters. Marin wound the key. The mechanism was stiff with age, but the melody came, thin and sweet. A waltz her grandmother used to hum while kneading bread. Someone sat on the floor, listened to the music, and let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to be seen. The next 12 days passed in a blur. Her sisters veered between guilt and spite. One moment trying to dissuade her, the next making cutting remarks about what awaited her in Colorado. Her father threw himself into practical arrangements, booking the train, arranging connections, as if shipping his daughter west was no different from a cattle transaction. Only her mother seemed troubled. Elizabeth Hartley found Marin folding clothes the night before departure. May I come in? Marin nodded. Couldn't trust her voice. Her mother sat on the edge of the narrow bed, smoothed her skirts. A nervous gesture Marin had inherited. I know what your sisters did. Marin's hands stilled on the dress she was folding. Vivian came to me last night, in tears. She told me everything. Elizabeth reached for Marin's hand. You don't have to do this. We can send word. Tell them you've taken ill. We can. No. The word came out harder than Marin intended, Mother. When has anyone in this family ever really seen me, Marin? You dress me in Cordelia's hand-me-downs because why waste money on the plain daughter? Father forgot my last birthday entirely. Vivian introduced me to her suitor's partner as just the spinster sister. She pulled her hand away, gentle but firm. I'm 24 years old, and I'm already invisible. That's not true, isn't it? Silence stretched between them. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. I've watched you, Mother. Marin kept her voice steady. The way you look at me sometimes. I can see you wondering. How did I produce something so ordinary, Marin? I'm not angry anymore. I promise. It just is what it is. She returned to her packing, folding a worn chemise. But this rancher, this Mr. Thorne, He has no expectations of beauty. He's not comparing me to anyone. He just wants someone who can work hard, keep a house. Be honest, she looked at her mother. Is that really so terrible? A marriage without love? Elizabeth's face crumpled. How did you become so strong? I had to be. Her mother stood, pulled Marin into a fierce embrace, then go. Go and be strong, and write to me. Not your father, not your sisters. Me. Tell me the truth about how you are. I will. They held each other. Elizabeth, smelling of lavender water and bread dough, familiar soft. Everything Marin was leaving behind. When her mother finally pulled away, she pressed something into Marin's hands, a leather-bound journal. Blank pages waiting. For your new life, Elizabeth whispered. Write your truth, so you never forget who you are. After she left, Marin sat on her bed, opened the journal on the first page. In her mother's elegant script, My dearest Marin, I have not been the mother you deserved. I let my own vanities blind me to your quiet strength. But I see you now, and I am in awe. Write honestly. Write bravely. And remember you carry my love with you, always. Your mother Marin pressed the journal to her chest, stared out at the darkening Missouri sky. Tomorrow. Tomorrow she would board a train, heading west, toward mountains she'd only seen in pictures, toward a man she knew only through one brutally honest letter, toward a life that terrified her. But at least it would be hers. The train station in St. Louis was chaos, noise, movement, families saying goodbye. Merchants shouting about luggage, the metallic screech of trains arriving and departing. Marin stood on the platform, clutching her carpet bag, her trunk already loaded. Feeling her courage waver, her father stood beside her, stiff, uncomfortable. Thomas Hartley had never been equipped to handle emotions. You'll write when you arrive. It wasn't a question. Yes, father, and if things are unsuitable, you can always. I'll be fine, she said it firmly, as much to convince herself as him. He nodded. Relief evident on his face. Your mother sent this. He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Said not to open it until you're on the train. Before Marin could respond, he pressed a quick kiss to her forehead, the most affection he'd shown her in years. Then he disappeared into the crowd. Gone Marin stood alone on the platform. Passengers flowed around her like water around a stone. The conductor called for final boarding. Her train, the one that would carry her away from everything she'd ever known, was releasing great clouds of steam, like a dragon preparing for flight. This was it. The last possible moment to change her mind, to return to the Bennett house and accept her fate. The spinster daughter, the disappointment, the one who was never quite enough. She thought of Ezra Thorne's letter. The choice is entirely yours. And she stepped onto the train. Her seat was by a window. Second class, not luxury, but clean, comfortable enough. She stored her carpet bag overhead, settled into her seat just as the train lurched into motion. St. Louis began to slide past her window, familiar streets giving way to unknown territory. Marin pressed her palm against the cool glass, watched her old life recede. Only when the city had disappeared completely did she remember her mother's package. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside the leather journal, and tucked between its pages, a folded note. In her mother's hand, my dearest girl, I know I failed you in so many ways, but know this, you are braver than any of us, stronger than we ever gave you credit for. Go west, build your new life, and know that part of me goes with you, hoping, praying that you find what you deserve, what we all denied you, to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. Your mother Marin clutched the note, stared out at the rolling Missouri countryside, and for the first time since this mad journey began, she let herself cry, not from fear, not from grief, but from something that felt dangerously close to relief. She opened the journal, found the pen her mother had tucked inside, and began to write. September 30th, 1884, somewhere between St. Louis and Kansas. I am on a train heading west to marry a stranger. My sisters sent my information as a joke. They expected me to be humiliated. Instead, I am free. I don't know what awaits me in Colorado. I don't know if this Ezra Thorne will be kind or cruel, handsome or ugly. I don't even know if it matters. What I know is this. For the first time in my life, I am choosing, not accepting what's left over, not settling for scraps, choosing, even if the choice terrifies me, even if I fail. At least it will be my failure, my life. My train carried her west for 3 days. She watched the landscape transform. Green Missouri giving way to the endless prairie of Kansas. Then to the high plains where grass stretched to the horizon, sky impossibly vast. Other passengers came and went. A family with noisy children. An elderly couple who smiled at her kindly. A young man who kept trying to catch her eye, until she made it clear she wasn't interested. At night, she lay in her narrow berth, listened to the rhythmic clatter of wheels on rails, felt the distance grow between who she had been and who she was becoming. She wrote in her journal by lamplight, October 2nd, 1884, somewhere in Kansas. I wonder what he looks like. The letter said nothing about his appearance, except that he is 36. 12 years older than me. I wonder if he is tall or short, dark or fair, handsome or plain. I wonder if it matters. In his letter, he wrote that he is not a romantic man. I've been trying to decide if that frightens me or relieves me. Romance in novels always seemed like a trap. All those breathless feelings and desperate passions that make sensible people act like fools. Maybe it's better to build something steady instead, something that won't burn out and leave you in ashes. Or maybe I'm just telling myself this because I've never had the chance to be romanced. And I'm trying not to mind. October 4th, 1884, Colorado Territory. The mountains appeared this morning. I've never seen anything like them. They rise from the plains like a wall, purple and blue against the sky, topped with snow even though it's only October. They're beautiful, they're terrifying. And somewhere in those mountains is a man who agreed to marry me sight unseen, because I had honest eyes. I keep wondering what he saw in that awful photograph, the one where I was squinting, looking worse than usual. What made him think, yes, her, she'll do. Tomorrow I arrive in Red Mesa. Tomorrow I meet him. Tomorrow, my new life begins. I am not ready. I will never be ready, but I'm going anyway. The train pulled into Cheyenne on a bright October morning. The air was different here, thinner, sharper, carrying scents Marin had no names for, sage and dust and something wild that made her heart race. The town sprawled before her, hat-fronted buildings, wide dirt streets. Nothing like the ordered civilization of Missouri. She had 4 hours before her connecting train to Red Mesa, so she wandered the main street, carpet bag in hand, trying to absorb this strange new reality. Cowboys in dusty chaps lounged outside saloons. A woman in a split riding skirt strode past, rifle slung over her shoulder. Nobody gave her a second glance. Back home, such a sight would have caused a scandal. Here it was just Tuesday. Marin found herself standing outside a telegraph office, staring at the door. She could still send word, could still say she'd changed her mind, that she was coming home. Her father would be disappointed, but unsurprised. Her sisters would laugh themselves sick. A weathered man in a cattleman's coat pushed past her, muttering about beef prices. Through the open door, she caught a glimpse of the telegraph operator, fingers flying over the keys, sending messages that would race along copper wires to distant destinations in seconds. She thought of Ezra Thorne's letter. I am not a romantic man. What kind of person wrote that in a marriage proposal? Someone who'd been hurt, maybe. Someone who'd loved and lost, and decided safety was better than passion. Or someone who simply told the truth, because lies were too much trouble. The door swung shut. Marin turned away without entering. She spent her remaining time in a small restaurant, forcing down stew she couldn't taste, while ranch hands at the next table talked loudly about winter coming, about cattle drives, about 100 things she didn't understand. One of them caught her eye, tipped his hat with a friendly smile. She looked away quickly, heat rising to her cheeks. When the whistle blew for the Red Mesa train, Marin gathered her things with trembling hands. This was it, the final leg, 4 more hours, and she'd be standing face to face with the man she'd agreed to marry. The train was smaller than the one from St. Louis Ruffer. She found a seat by the window, watched as the countryside grew wilder. Mountains rising closer, their peaks already dusted with early snow. The train followed a river through a canyon, red rock walls towering overhead, then emerged onto rolling grassland that seemed to stretch forever. Marin pressed her face to the window, trying to imagine living in all this space. Back home, you were never more than a mile from a neighbor. Here you could ride for days and see nothing but sky. As the afternoon sun began its descent, the train slowed. A tiny station appeared ahead, barely more than a platform and a small building. Red Mesa painted on the side in fading letters beyond it. A modest collection of buildings clottered along a single main street. Her stomach twisted itself into knots. The train hissed to a stop. The conductor helped her down, unloading her trunk with casual efficiency. "Someone meeting you, miss?" "Yes. I think so." "Well, good luck to you then." He tipped his cap, climbed back aboard. Within minutes, the train was pulling away, leaving her standing alone on the platform, with her trunk and carpet bag, the wind tugging at her skirts. The platform was empty, except for a rangy yellow dog sleeping in the late afternoon sun. Marin's heart sank. Had she gotten the date wrong? Had he changed his mind? Then she heard footsteps on the wooden planks, and turned. Ezra Colton Thorne was not what she'd expected. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors. His face was all hard angles, sun-browned skin, deep lines around his eyes from squinting into distances, dark hair touched with gray at the temples, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He wore work clothes, canvas pants, a plain shirt, a leather vest, and he carried his hat in his hands as he approached. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she didn't. She'd promised herself she wouldn't start this marriage by being a coward. He stopped a few feet away for a long moment. Neither of them spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "Miss Hartley." His voice was deep, rough-edged, the kind of voice that didn't waste words. Marin nodded, not trusting her own voice yet. "Ezra Thorne." He didn't offer his hand. "Your journey was all right?" "Yes, thank you." Another silence stretched between them. He was still studying her, those gray eyes taking in every detail. Marin felt heat crawl up her neck. She knew what he was seeing, plain features. Mousy hair coming loose from its pins after 3 days of travel. A dress that had been unfashionable even before it became a hand-me-down. The photograph had been bad, but reality was probably worse. She lifted her chin slightly, met his gaze. If he was disappointed, she'd rather he say it now. But his expression didn't change. He simply nodded once, as if confirming something to himself, and picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing. "Wagons this way. We've got about 2 hours to the ranch. Should head out before dark." He started walking. Marin grabbed her carpet bag, hurried after him, with her shorter legs struggling to match his stride. The wagon was plain but well-maintained, pulled by 2 stray horses who nickered softly as Ezra loaded her trunk. He offered her his hand to help her up to the seat. Marin took it. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip firm but careful. He climbed up beside her, took the reins, clicked to the horses. The wagon lurched forward, wheels creaking, and Red Mesa Station began to recede behind them. They rode in silence through the outskirts of town. Marin tried not to stare at everything, but it was impossible. The mountains were so close now, purple-blue against the evening sky. The land rolled away in all directions, golden grass rippling in the wind like an ocean. The air smelled of earth and growing things, and that wild scent she'd first noticed in Cheyenne. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Not really meaning to speak aloud, Ezra glanced at her. It's hard country. Beautiful, yes, but hard. Winters are brutal. Summers can bring drought. The work never stops. It sounded like a warning. Marin nodded. I'm not afraid of hard work. I read that in your letter. There was something in his tone she couldn't quite identify. Not mockery exactly, but not quite belief either. You said you were raised on a farm, that you knew how to cook, clean, mend, preserve food. That you weren't afraid of an honest day's labor. He quoted the words precisely. Marin's cheeks burned. Those had been her sister's words. Not hers, but they weren't entirely lies. She had done all those things, even if the letter had made her sound more capable than she felt. Yes, good. He kept his eyes on the road. I've got a housekeeper. Nell Pritchard, widow woman. Comes in twice a week. She's been managing things since my wife passed. But a ranch this size needs more than that. He paused. I need someone who can handle the household, help with accounts, manage supplies. Someone steady, not someone beautiful or charming or accomplished, just steady. It was the lowest bar possible, and yet Marin felt a flutter of anxiety that she might not even clear it. I'll do my best, she said quietly. Ezra nodded, but didn't respond. They fell back into silence. The road wound through increasingly wild country. They passed a few small homesteads, smoke rising from chimneys, lights beginning to glow in windows as evening approached. Then even those disappeared, and there was nothing but grass and sky. And the creak of wagon wheels. Marin studied Ezra from the corner of her eye, trying to understand the man she'd agreed to marry. His hands on the reins were steady, confident. He sat straight-backed but relaxed, moving easily with the wagon's motion. Everything about him spoke of competence, of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and had no need to prove it. But there was something else too, a guardedness, a sense of walls built high and thick. Your letter said you were a widower, Marin ventured. How long? She stopped, suddenly aware this might be too personal a question. For a man she'd known all of 30 minutes, 5 years, his voice was flat. Abigail died in childbirth, the baby. Our son lived. Josiah's 4 now. The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, so carefully emotionless, told Marin everything about how much it had cost him. This was a man who'd loved deeply, and paid the price for it. I'm sorry, she said. It was a long time ago, but it wasn't. Not really. 5 years might seem long. But grief didn't follow calendars. Marin thought of her grandmother's death when she was 12, how even now, 12 years later, she sometimes turned to share something before remembering she was gone. Is that why you advertised for a wife? The question escaped before she could stop it. For your son? To give him a mother? Ezra's jaw tightened, partly. Also because ranchers around here need wives. It's practical. A man can't run a place this size alone. And I'm tired of town gossips, trying to match me with every available woman in 3 counties. He glanced at her. I figured someone from back east wouldn't know me. Wouldn't have expectations. We could be clear about what this is, and what is it? A partnership, an arrangement. You help run the house and look after Josiah. I provide for you, protect you, treat you with respect. We build something practical together. He paused. I'm not looking for romance, Miss Hartley. I don't have that in me anymore. But I can offer you a decent life. If you're willing to work for it, it should have stung. That clinical assessment of their future together. But instead, Marin felt something in her chest loosen slightly. At least there would be no pretense, no need to try to be something she wasn't. He wanted practical. And practical she could do. That seems fair, she said. He nodded, apparently satisfied, and they lapsed back into silence as the sun continued its descent toward the western mountains. The light was nearly gone when they crested a rise, and Ezra pulled the horses to a stop. There, he said. Pointing, Marin looked where he indicated and felt her breath catch. The ranch spread out in the valley below. Backdropped by foothills that glowed purple in the twilight, the main house was larger than she'd expected, a sprawling structure of logs and stone, with a wide porch, wrapping around at least two sides. Outbuildings clustered nearby barns, a stable, what might be a bunkhouse. Various sheds and corrals. Beyond them, she could see cattle dotting the grassland, dark shapes in the fading light. Lamplight glowed in the house windows, warm, welcoming, against the gathering dark. "It's bigger than I thought," Maren said softly. 3,000 acres of deeded land, another 2,000 in grazing leases. About 800 head of cattle. "Though that'll grow after spring calving." Ezra's voice held quiet pride. "I run it with 4 permanent hands. Hire on extra help during roundup and drives." He clicked to the horses. They started down the slope. "My father started this place with nothing but a land grant and determination. I've spent the last 10 years building it into something that'll last." As they drew closer, Maren could make out more details. Neat fence lines, well-maintained buildings, the sense of order and care that pervaded everything. Whatever else Ezra Thorne might be, he was clearly a man who took pride in his work. A dog began barking as they approached. A figure emerged from the barn, a lanky man in his 20s, who raised a hand in greeting. "That's Ben Cooper." "My foreman," Ezra said. "He's been with me since he was 16. Good man. Steady hand. You'll meet the others tomorrow." They pulled up in front of the house. Ben hurried over to take the horses. "Boss." "Ma'am," he touched his hat brim to Maren, curiosity evident in his face, but politeness keeping him from staring. "Ben, this is Miss Hartley." "We'll be married tomorrow, married tomorrow," Maren repeated faintly. "I thought." "Pastor Miller is riding out in the morning." Ezra swung down from the wagon with easy grace. Figured there was no point in waiting. He reached up to help Maren down. "Unless you need time, I can send word to postpone if..." "No." Maren's voice came out steadier than she felt. "No, tomorrow is fine. What difference would waiting make?" She'd already traveled halfway across the country to marry this man. Another day, another week. It wouldn't change the fundamental nature of what they were doing. Ezra nodded. Hefted her trunk. "Come on. I'll show you to your room." Nell left supper warming. "You must be hungry." Maren followed him up the porch steps and through a heavy wooden door into the ranch house. The interior was dim, lit by a few oil lamps, but she got an impression of solid furniture, clean floors, a surprising lack of clutter. This was a man's space, practical and spare, but not uncomfortable. Ezra led her down a hallway, opened a door. This was Abigail's sewing room. "I had it converted." He set her trunk down, lit the lamp on a small dresser. The room was modest but clean, a narrow bed with a thick quilt. The dresser, a washstand, a single wooden chair. A window looked out toward what she thought might be the barn. Though it was too dark to tell for sure. "It's Smalls," Ezra said. And for the first time she heard something like apology in his voice. "But it's yours. I'm across the hall. Josiah next to me. Bathing room is at the end of the hall. We've got a gravity-fed system from a tank on the roof. Not fancy, but it works. It's fine," Maren said. More than fine, actually. For the first time in her life, she'd have a room that was just hers, not shared with sisters, not relegated to whatever space was left over. "Thank you." Ezra lingered in the doorway, as if there was something else he wanted to say. In the lamplight, the lines in his face seemed deeper, shadows collecting in the hollows of his cheeks. He looked tired, Maren realized. Not just physically tired, but soul tired. The kind of weariness that came from carrying too much for too long. "I know this isn't what most women dream of," he said finally. "Coming to a strange place, marrying a man you don't know, taking on someone else's child." He paused. "If you want to back out, I'll arrange passage back to Missouri." No judgment, no questions asked. It was the second time he'd offered her an escape, Maren realized. Once in his letter, "The choice is entirely yours." And now again, he kept giving her chances to run. "I don't want to back out," she said quietly. "I came here with my eyes open, Mr. Thorne. I know what I'm getting into." That wasn't entirely true, of course. She had no idea what she was getting into, but she knew what she was leaving behind, and that was enough. Something shifted in Ezra's expression. Relief, maybe, or respect, Ezra, he said. If we're getting married tomorrow, you should call me Ezra. Ezra, she repeated. The name felt strange on her tongue, too intimate for someone who was still essentially a stranger. And you should call me Marin, he nodded. Marin, then. Get yourself settled. I'll bring up some supper in a bit. We eat early around here, ranch hours. But I figure you're too tired for company tonight. Thank you, Ezra. He left. Closing the door softly behind him, Marin sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly aware of just how exhausted she was. 3 days of train travel, the stress of meeting Ezra, the surreal feeling of sitting in a house in Colorado territory that would by tomorrow evening be her home. She unpacked mechanically, hanging her few dresses in a small wardrobe, setting out her brush and mirror on the dresser, at the bottom of her carpet bag. She found the music box, still wrapped in her shawl. She set it carefully on the dresser, then on impulse, wound the key. The tinkling melody filled the small room, delicate, impossibly sweet. It was a sound from her old life, a reminder of who she'd been before she became someone who married strangers for practical reasons. A soft knock interrupted the music. It's Ezra. I've got supper. Marin quickly shut the music box, opened the door. Ezra held a tray laden with stew, fresh bread and coffee. The aroma made her stomach clench with sudden hunger. I heard music, he said, as he set the tray on the dresser, my grandmother's music box. I'm sorry if it bothered. It didn't bother me. He glanced at the small wooden box, something unreadable crossing his face. Abigail used to play piano. Not well, but she enjoyed it. I haven't heard music in this house in 5 years. He paused at the door. It was nice. Hearing it again, he left before Marin could respond. She ate her supper slowly, savoring the rich stew that was better than anything she'd expected. Through the window, she could hear the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. Horses moving in the barn. The distant lowing of cattle. Men's voices calling goodnight to each other. She thought about Ezra's words. I haven't heard music in this house in 5 years. What kinda a life was that imbly of music, imbly of anything soft or beautiful? Just work and survival, and the ghost of a dead wife. And tomorrow she would become part of that life. Marin washed up using the basin on the washstand, then changed into her nightgown. The bed was softer than she'd expected, the quilt thick and warm. She lay in the darkness listening to unfamiliar sounds, and tried to imagine the day ahead. There would be a wedding. She'd stand next to Ezra Thorne and make vows that were supposed to be sacred, permanent. She'd promised to love and honor a man she'd spoken maybe 50 words to, and then she'd be his wife, bound to him by law and custom. And the sheer impracticality of turning back the sleeve should have been impossible. But exhaustion dragged her under like a riptide. She dreamed of trains that went nowhere, of standing on platforms while strangers studied her with gray eyes, of music boxes playing wedding marches in empty houses. Morning came too soon. Pale light filtered through the curtain, and somewhere in the house she could hear movement. Marin lay still for a moment, gripped by paralyzing fear. What had she done? What insanity had possessed her to travel across the country to marry a man she didn't know? Then she heard a child's voice, high, questing, and Ezra's deeper rumble in response. The mundane sounds of a household waking up, a life going on waiting for her to become part of it. She rose and dressed in her best dress, a simple blue cotton that Cordelia had passed down 2 years ago. Too big in the shoulders, too short in the hem, but the nicest thing she owned. She pinned up her hair with shaking hands, stared at her reflection in the small mirror, plain Marin Hartley. About to become plain Marin Thorne, same face, different name, same disappointment, different location. No, she wouldn't think like that. She would be practical. Like Ezra wanted, she would work hard. Earn her place here, build something steady, even if it was never beautiful. Breakfast was waiting in the kitchen when she ventured downstairs. Ezra stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with surprising dexterity, while a small boy sat at the table, swinging his legs and chattering about horses. And Ben says I can help brush thunder when I'm bigger. But I'm already big, Papa. I'm 4 whole years. And that's very big. The child stopped abruptly as Marin entered, his eyes going wide. He was beautiful. This motherless boy, dark curls like his father's, but bright blue eyes that must have come from his mother. A scattering of freckles across his nose. A gap where he'd lost a front tooth. Josiah, Ezra said quietly. This is Miss Marin. Remember what I told you? The boy nodded solemnly, stared at her with those impossibly blue eyes. Then silence, his mouth closed, opened again, but no sound came out. Marin's heart cracked. This child couldn't speak, had been silent for 5 years. Since the day his mother died. She knelt down, brought herself to his level. Hello, Josiah, she said softly. It's very nice to meet you. He looked at her, then at his father, then back at her. Finally he nodded. Once, and returned to his pancakes. Crisis averted. Strangers accepted, life continuing. Marin stood, found Ezra watching her with an unreadable expression. Coffee's hot, he said. Pastor should be here within the hour. She poured herself coffee, with hands that had steadied somewhat. Took a seat at the table. Ezra served her pancakes without asking, then sat down with his own plate. They ate in a silence broken only by Josiah's periodic observations, which he communicated through gestures and tugs on Ezra's sleeve, pointing at things, making faces, finding ways to be heard without words. It was oddly domestic, like they were already a family, just trying on the roles to see if they fit. The pastor arrived right on time, a weathered man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Ezra. You must be Miss Hartley. I'm Pastor Miller. I've known this stubborn cuss since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Watch your mouth around the boy, Ezra said mildly, but there was affection in his voice. The boys heard worse from the ranch hands, I'm sure. Pastor Miller winked at Josiah. Ho giggled silent, but clearly delighted. Then the pastor's expression grew more serious. He looked between Ezra and Marin. You two sure about this? Marriage is a serious undertaking. We're sure, Ezra said. The pastor's eyes lingered on Marin. Miss Hartley? She thought about her sister's laughter, her father's disappointment. The life stretching behind her like a prison sentence. She thought about Ezra's honest letter, and Josiah's gap-toothed silence, and the way the mountains looked purple against the morning sky. I'm sure, she said. All right then. Let's make it legal. They stood in the parlor, morning light slanting through the windows. Josiah sat on the sofa, swinging his legs. Watching with solemn interest, Pastor Miller opened his Bible and began to read, Dearly beloved. We are gathered here. Marin barely heard the words. She was too aware of Ezra standing beside her, tall followed, his shoulder almost brushing hers. He'd put on a clean shirt for the occasion. She noticed, had even shaved. The gesture felt significant somehow, a sign that this mattered to him, even if it was just practical. Ezra Colton Thorne. Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice was steady. Sure. Marin Elowen Hartley. Do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? This was it, the moment of no return. After this, she would be bound to this stranger. In the eyes of God and law. I do, she whispered. Then by the power vested in me. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Pastor Miller smiled. Ezra. You may kiss your bride. Ezra hesitated, and Marin saw uncertainty flash across his face. The first real emotion she'd seen from him, besides careful control. Then he bent down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. His lips brushed hers, light as a whisper, over in a heartbeat, but in that brief contact. Marin felt the rough calluses on his hands, where he'd cupped her shoulders, smelled the faint scent of leather and soap, sensed the tightly leashed strength in the way he held himself so carefully gentle. Then he stepped back, and it was done. She was married. Mrs. Ezra Thorne, for better or worse, in a log house in the Colorado mountains, to a man who didn't believe in romance, and a silent child who needed a mother. And somehow, despite everything, despite the fear and the uncertainty and the sheer insanity of what she'd just done, Marin felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not quite hope, but close, very close. "Congratulations," Pastor Miller said warmly. "May God bless this union." Josiah jumped off the sofa, ran to them, his small face bright with something that looked like hope. He tugged on Marin's skirt, pointed at her, then at himself, then made a gesture she didn't understand. Ezra cleared his throat. "He's asking if you're his mama now." Marin looked down at this child, who would never remember his real mother, who was looking up at her with those impossibly blue eyes waiting. She knelt, brought herself to his level. "Yes," she said softly. "If you'd like me to be." Josiah didn't speak. Of course not. He hadn't spoken in 5 years. But he threw his small arms around her neck, held on tight, and Marin felt something in her chest crack open, just a little enough to let in light. After Pastor Miller left, an awkward silence descended. They were married now, husband and wife, partners in this practical arrangement, but they were still strangers, still uncertain how to be around each other. "I should get to work." Ezra shifted his weight. "Cattle don't care about weddings. Nell should be here soon. She can show you around properly, explain how things work." "All right." He hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket, a ring, simple gold, worn smooth with time. This was Abigail's. "I want you to have it." Marin stared at the ring, understanding the significance of what he was offering. His first wife's ring, the symbol of a love that had ended in tragedy. "I can't." "Why not? It's hers." "It wouldn't be right." Ezra's jaw tightened. "She's gone, Marin. And you're my wife now." She would have wanted it used, not sitting in a box collecting dust. Still, Marin hesitated. Taking this ring felt like overstepping, claiming something that wasn't meant for her. "Please," the single word. Rough with something that might have been pain, decided her. She held out her hand. Ezra slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large, loose enough that she'd need to be careful not to lose it. But it felt right somehow, a weight, a promise, a reminder that this was real. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded, turning away. "I'll be back at midday for dinner." "Josiah, you help Mrs. Thorne today. You hear?" Mrs. Thorne, the name sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Josiah stood there, silent as always, but his eyes were bright alert, watching his father leave, then turning to her, waiting to see what came next. Nell Pritchard arrived around mid-morning, a small woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and efficient movements. She looked Marin up and down. "So you're the new Mrs. Thorne?" "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Marin. I'm Nell. I've been keeping this house since the first Mrs. Thorne passed. Mr. Thorne tells me you'll be taking over most duties, but I'll still come twice weekly to help with heavy cleaning and laundry." There was something in her tone, not quite challenged, but not quite welcome either. "I'd appreciate any help you can give me," Marin said carefully. "This is all very new to me." Nell's expression softened slightly. "You're honest. That's good. Come, I'll show you the kitchen, the pantry, the root cellar. You must know where everything is." The tour was thorough and slightly overwhelming. Nell had been managing this mass household with military precision, and she had strong opinions about everything, from how to organize the pantry to the proper way to black a stove. Marin took mental notes, trying to absorb the flood of information. "Mr. Thorne and the men eat big meals," Nellie explained as they stood in the well-stocked pantry. "Breakfast at dawn, dinner at midday, supper at dusk. Ranch work burns energy. You must cook plenty. Always have coffee ready. Keep bread fresh." "What about Josiah? What does he usually eat?" "Same as the men. Just smaller portions. He's a good eater. No fussing." Nell paused. "He's a good boy. Lonely, but good. The men try their best, but a child needs a mother." The weight of that statement settled on Marin's shoulders. This child needed a mother, and she was supposed to be it, despite having no idea what she was doing. The first Mrs. Thorne, Maren ventured. What was she like? Nell's face closed down immediately. That's not my place to say. You should ask Mr. Thorne. But Maren knew she wouldn't. Ezra had made it clear he wasn't interested in discussing his first marriage. And she wasn't about to push. By midday, Maren was exhausted, from trying to remember everything, from the strange newness of it all. But she had to cook dinner, for Ezra and the ranch hands. She settled on something simple: fried potatoes, bacon, biscuits, strong coffee. It wasn't fancy, but it was filling. And she managed to have it ready when Ezra came trooping in with two of his men. "Boss, this is a pleasant surprise," one of them said. A stocky fellow with a graying beard. "Been a while since we had a hot meal at midday." Ezra shot him a look. "Mind your manners, Pete. This is my wife, Mrs. Thorne. Maren, this is Pete Williams. He's been with me for 8 years, and that's Sam Yates. Joined us last spring. Sam was younger, barely 20. With an easy smile, "Ma'am." "Welcome to Thorne Ranch, thank you," Maren said, serving plates with hands that shook slightly. Would the food be good enough? Would they compare her to Abigail? Find her lacking, but the men ate with the focused intensity of people who did physical labor all day, barely stopping to breathe between bites. Pekti asked for seconds. Sam complimented the biscuits. Even Ezra nodded, which might have been approval. "Hard to tell. This is good," he said simply. "Thank you." It was such a small thing, that thank you, but it made something warm bloom in Maren's chest. She'd done something right. She'd fed them, and they were satisfied. Josiah chattered throughout the meal, in his silent way, tugging on Ezra's sleeve, making gestures, pointing at things. The men indulged him with easy affection, clearly used to interpreting his wordless communication. After they returned to work, Maren cleaned up the kitchen. With Josiah's help, he couldn't reach the sink. But he carefully dried dishes as she handed them to him, his small face serious with concentration. "You're a good helper," she told him. He beamed, silent but glowing with pride. That afternoon, Maren explored the house more thoroughly. It was larger than it had seemed last night, with a parlor, dining room, Ezra's study, and several other rooms whose purposes weren't immediately clear. Everything was clean, but sparse. The home of someone who'd stopped caring about comfort or beauty years ago. The only room that felt different was Josiah's, with its chaotic collection of treasures, carved wooden animals, interesting rocks, bits of string and feathers. The accumulation of a child's curiosity. Maren found herself in the parlor, staring at a piano pushed against one wall, covered with dust, clearly untouched for years. This must have been Abigail's piano, the one Ezra said she'd played, not well, but enjoyed. Impulse. Maren lifted the cover, pressed a key, the note rang out, slightly out of tune, but still sweet. Josiah came running, his eyes wide. He pointed at the piano, then at Maren. A question in his face. "Do you want me to play?" He nodded vigorously. Maren sat on the bench, her fingers finding the keys. She wasn't skilled. Her grandmother had taught her a few simple melodies. Nothing fancy, but she played what she remembered, a folk tune about rivers and mountains, her fingers stumbling over the notes. But the music filled the empty room, like light filling darkness. Josiah climbed up beside her, watched her hands with fascination. She showed him how to find middle C, how to press the keys gently instead of banging them. He had long fingers, like his father's. He'd be good at this if he practiced. They were still playing when Ezra came in for supper. He stopped in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Sorry," Maren said quickly, closing the piano cover. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine." His voice was rough, "I told you. It's nice to hear music again." He looked at Josiah. "Go wash up for supper, son." After the boy scampered off, Ezra lingered. Abigail bought that piano 6 months before she died. Had it shipped all the way from Denver. She was so proud of it. He ran his hand over the dusty surface. "I couldn't bring myself to sell it. But I couldn't stand to hear it played either. Made the house too empty. "I'm sorry," Marin said softly. "I won't play it if it bothers you." "No." Ezra looked at her directly for the first time since coming in. Those gray eyes intense. "Play it. Teach Josiah. Fill this house with music again. It's been dead too long." He left before she could respond. But his words echoed in her head all through supper preparation. It's been dead too long. He wasn't just talking about music. He was talking about himself. The first week passed in a blur of learning and adjusting. Marin threw herself into her new role with desperate determination, rising before dawn to make breakfast, spending her days cleaning and cooking. Learning the rhythms of ranch life, Josiah became her constant shadow, following her from room to room, helping with small tasks, showing her things with the earnest intensity only a 4-year-old could muster. The ranch hands treated her with cautious respect. Polite but distant. She heard them sometimes, talking when they thought she couldn't hear, speculating about the boss's quick marriage, wondering if she'd stick it out when winter came and the work got harder. Ezra remained an enigma. He was courteous, appreciative of her efforts, but emotionally distant. He slept across the hall, woke before her, worked until dark, maintained careful walls between them. They were married, but they were strangers sharing a house, orbiting each other like planets that never quite aligned. One evening, about 10 days after the wedding, Marin was putting Josiah to bed. He climbed under the covers, his small face serious. Then he tugged on her sleeve, pointed at her, then at a faded photograph on his bedside table. A young woman with light hair, holding a baby, Abigail. Marin's heart clenched. "That's your mama," she said softly. "Your first mama. She loved you very much." Josiah looked at the photograph, then at Marin. Then he did something that broke her heart. He touched the photograph gently, then touched Marin's hand, comparing, trying to understand how he could have two mothers. "She's always your mama," Marin whispered. "I'm not trying to replace her. I'm just here now to take care of you." Josiah studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded, satisfied with whatever he saw there. He snuggled down into his blankets and closed his eyes. Marin sat on the edge of his bed, watching him drift off to sleep. This motherless, ballless boy who was trying so hard to understand. When she finally left his room, she found Ezra in the hallway, leaning against the wall. How long had he been there? How much had he heard? "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not trying to erase her. I would never. Some would. Some would want him to forget, to pretend she never existed." Ezra's voice was rough, "But you didn't. You honored her memory. That means more than I can say." He started toward his own room, then stopped. "Marin, you're doing well. Here, with Josiah, with everything. I know I haven't said it, but you're doing well." He disappeared into his room before she could respond, leaving Marin standing in the hallway, heart pounding. It was such a small thing, that acknowledgement, but it felt like a victory. November arrived with a crispness in the air, wan of winter's approach. The aspens on the mountains had turned gold, then blazed like fire against the evergreens, before dropping their leaves in a single windswept week. Marin watched the transformation from the kitchen window, while kneading bread dough, marveling at how quickly the landscape could change. She'd been at Thorn Ranch for 6 weeks now, and the rhythms of ranch life had started to feel almost natural. She knew which hens were the best layers, which horses had temperamental dispositions, how to read the sky for coming weather. She'd learned to cook for hungry men who worked from dawn to dusk, to mend clothes torn by barbed wire and hard labor, to stretch supplies and plan ahead, for the long winter Nell kept warning her about. Josiah had become her constant companion. They had a routine now. After breakfast, an hour of lessons at the kitchen table. She was teaching him letters, sit-bill reading. He learned slowly, but with fierce determination. Then he'd help her with lighter chores, chattering in his silent way about everything from cloud shapes to why horses had such big teeth. Ezra had started joining them sometimes during these morning lessons. Leaning against the doorframe, coffee in hand, watching. He never interrupted, never criticized her methods. But his presence felt significant somehow, like he was trying to understand something. One morning, after Josiah had successfully spelled cat with his letter blocks, Ezra spoke, "You're good with him." Marin looked up, surprised. He's easy to teach. He wants to learn. Still, you're patient. You don't get frustrated when he struggles? Ezra set down his coffee cup. Abigail used to. Get frustrated, I mean. She loved him. But she didn't understand why things took him so long. Why he couldn't just speak. It was the first time he'd voluntarily mentioned Abigail, without Marin having to ask. She chose her words carefully. Every child learns differently. Josiah's silence doesn't mean he's slow. It just means he communicates in other ways. That's what I told her. But she thought, if she just tried hard enough, he'd talk. And when he didn't, she blamed herself. Ezra's voice was tight. Thought she'd failed him somehow. She didn't fail him, Marin said firmly. Children don't come with instructions. We all do our best. Ezra looked at her for a long moment, then nodded, and left. But something had shifted. A wall had cracked, just a little. The first trip to town after the wedding came in mid-November. They needed supplies for winter. Flour, sugar, coffee, salt. All the things you couldn't produce on a ranch. Ezra drove the wagon. Marin beside him. Josiah wedged between them, the three of them looking like what they were, a family. Red Mesa on a Saturday afternoon was bustling. Ranchers and their families, cowboys on their day off, shopkeepers doing brisk business. Ezra helped Marin down from the wagon, his hand lingering on her waist just a moment longer than necessary. Mercantile first, he said. Make a list of what you need. Don't be shy about it. Inside the mercantile, Marin tried to focus on supplies, while pretending not to notice the cluster of women by the fabric counter, talking in low voices, shooting glances her way. The shopkeeper, Mr. Henderson, was friendly enough, helping her find items on her list, making suggestions about quantities. You'll want extra flour come January, Mrs. Thorne, and dried beans, rice, coffee. Gets hard to make it to town once the snow starts. As Marin was examining different grades of coffee, a voice spoke behind her. So you're the new Mrs. Thorne. Marin turned, a woman about her age, blonde, pretty, with calculating blue eyes. Yes, Marin Thorne, Lydia Ashford. My father owns the ranch adjacent to Ezra's. We've known each other since childhood. The emphasis on childhood was deliberate. Such a surprise when we heard Ezra had married. He's always been so. Particular, Lydia. Ezra's voice was cold as he appeared at Marin's elbow. I see you've met my wife. I was just welcoming her to Red Mesa, Lydia said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It must be quite an adjustment. Coming from civilization to this rough country. Marin's doing fine, Ezra said shortly. If you'll excuse us, he steered Marin away. His hand firm on her elbow. Once they were out of shot, Marin spoke quietly. She's very pretty. She's very tiresome. Ezra handed the shopkeeper his list. We'll take all of this, Henderson. Have it loaded in my wagon? Outside, they ran into Pastor Miller, who greeted them warmly. Marin. Ezra. How are you settling in, my dear? Very well, thank you, Pastor. Wonderful. Wonderful. You must come to the church social next month. Good way to meet people. Make friends. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. Don't let the town gossips bother you. They mean well. Mostly. Just curious. After the pastor moved on, Ezra took Marin to a small restaurant. The place was crowded with Saturday diners, and Marin felt conspicuous as they found a table. More whispers, more stares. She kept her chin up. Refused to let them see how much it bothered her. A man approached their table, tall, well-dressed, with an oily smile that made Marin's skin crawl. Ezra Thorne. Heard you finally took a wife. Martin Dalton. Ezra's tone was arctic. The man extended his hand to Marin. Welcome to Red Mesa, Mrs. Thorne. I'm Martin Dalton. I own the bank here. Thank you, Marin said, reluctantly shaking his hand. Dalton. Ezra's voice held a warning. We're trying to have a meal, of course. Of course. Just wanted to congratulate you. And to mention. My offer on your south section still stands. Prime grazing land. And I'm willing to pay top dollar. Not interested. Everything's for sale at the right price, Ezra. Think about it. Dalton tipped his hat at Marin and moved away. Who is that? Marin asked. Martin Dalton owns the bank and half the businesses in town. He's been trying to buy up ranch land for years. Wants to consolidate it all under his control. Ezra's jaw was tight. My father used to say Dalton would sell his own mother if the price was right. The rest of the meal was tense. Ezra clearly irritated by the encounter. As they left the restaurant, they nearly collided with Lydia Ashford again, this time accompanied by an older couple, who could only be her parents. Ezra, Mrs. Ashford gushed. We simply must have you and your new bride over for dinner soon. It's been too long since we've seen you socially. We appreciate the offer, Mrs. Ashford. But we're quite busy with ranch work. Nonsense. Everyone needs to socialize. How about next Sunday after church? Nothing fancy. Just a neighborly meal. Marin could see Ezra searching for a polite refusal. So she spoke up. That would be lovely, Mrs. Ashford. Thank you for the invitation. Ezra shot her a look. But he couldn't contradict her without being rude. Sunday, then. On the ride home, he was silent for several miles. Finally, he said, You didn't have to accept that invitation. The Ashfords are. I know Lydia wants you for herself. And her parents probably encouraged it for years. Marin kept her eyes on the road ahead. But we're married now, and I'm not going to hide away because some people are disappointed by your choice. Ezra was quiet for another mile, then surprising her. He said, You handled today well. The gossip, the stares, all of it. Held your head up. What choice did I have? You could have fallen apart. Some women would have. I'm not some women. The words came out sharper than she intended. I've spent my whole life being looked at and found wanting, Ezra. The women of Red Mesa aren't any harder to face than my own sisters. He glanced at her, something shifting in his expression. Your sisters? You never talk about your family. There's not much to say. I have 3 beautiful sisters who never let me forget I wasn't. A father who saw me as a disappointment and a burden. A mother who loved me but didn't quite know what to do with me. Marin shrugged. They sent me here as a joke. Did you know that? They filled out the application to humiliate me, to make me a laughingstock. Ezra's hands tightened on the reins, I wondered. The letter was too flowery. Didn't match the honesty in your photograph. What honesty? In your eyes. He was quiet for a moment. Most people lie with their eyes. Put on whatever face they think the world wants to see. But your eyes in that photograph, they looked tired, sad, real. Like someone who'd stopped pretending. Marin blinked back sudden tears. No one had ever said anything like that about her before. No one had ever looked at her and seen past the plain surface that sucked it to anything underneath. I thought you were just desperate, she admitted. Willing to take anyone. Even me, I was desperate, Ezra said bluntly. But not for just anyone. For someone who understood that life isn't a romantic fairy tale. For a partner. Not an ornament, he paused. Your letter might have been a lie. But your eyes told the truth. So I took a chance. They rode in silence for a while. The mountains purple against the evening sky, the air cooling as the sun descended. Finally, Marin said, for what it's worth. I'm glad they played that joke. I'm glad I'm here. Ezra looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression softened. Yeah, he said quietly. Me too. It was a small moment. A tiny crack in the walls he'd built. But it felt like a beginning. The dinner at the Ashford Ranch, the following Sunday, was exactly as awkward as Marin had feared. The house was ostentatious, decorated with expensive furniture that seemed out of place in Colorado territory. Mrs. Ashford fussed over them with forced hospitality, while Mr. Ashford talked cattle prices with Ezra. Lydia spent the entire meal finding ways to reminisce about her and Ezra's shared childhood. Remember the summer dance when we were 16, Ezra? You were so gallant. fetching me lemonade every time my glass was empty. I don't recall, Ezra said flatly. Oh, but you must. It was the summer before you went to work on your father's ranch full-time. Before you met. Lydia stopped abruptly, but the damage was done before you met Abigail. That's what she'd been about to say. Martha focused on her roast beef, trying to appear unbothered. But under the table, Ezra's hand found hers, squeezed briefly, a gesture of solidarity, of choosing her side. After dinner, while the men retired to Mr. Ashford's study, Marin found herself trapped in the parlor, with Lydia and Mrs. Ashford. So tell us about yourself, Marin. Mrs. Ashford said with false sweetness. What did your father do back east? He owned a farm in Missouri. A farm? Lydia's tone made it sound distasteful. How? Rustic. I suppose that's why you adjusted so quickly to ranch life. Farming and ranching are quite different. But yes, I'm used to hard work. Well, you'll certainly get plenty of that at Thorn Ranch, Mrs. Ashford said. Poor Ezra has let that place become so practical. No feminine touches at all. Abigail used to have such beautiful flower gardens. The house could use some work, Marin agreed carefully. You must find it terribly isolating, Lydia continued, being so far from town, from civilization, and Ezra is so intense, so focused on work. Abigail used to complain that he barely spoke to her for days on end during roundup season. Lydia, Mrs. Ashford said, but there was no real reproach in her voice. I'm just trying to help. Marin should know what she's gotten herself into. Ezra Thorn is not an easy man to be married to. He's cold, distant. Married to that ranch more than he ever was to Abigail. That's enough. The words came out harder than Marin intended. Both women stared at her. My husband is a good man who works hard to provide for his family, and I don't appreciate hearing negative speculation about my marriage. Or comparisons to his first wife. She stood, if you'll excuse me. I need some air. She walked out of the parlor before they could respond. Her heart hammering. She'd never spoken to anyone like that in her life. Back home, she'd always been the quiet one. The one who absorbed insults and moved on. But she wasn't that person anymore. She found Ezra in the front hall, clearly looking for her. Ready to go? Please, he didn't ask what had happened, but she saw his jaw tighten as they made their excuses and left. On the ride home, the silence was companionable, rather than awkward. Thank you, Ezra said finally. For what? For defending me. I heard what you said to Lydia. Through the door, he paused. Most people wouldn't have stood up to her. She's used to getting her way. She had no right to speak about you like that. Or about Abigail. Ezra was quiet for a long moment. Abigail and I. It wasn't perfect. We married young. Had different ideas about what life should be. She wanted social occasions and refinement. I wanted to build the ranch. We loved each other. But it was hard sometimes. He took a breath. Lydia isn't wrong that I'm not easy to be married to. I know that. Marriage shouldn't be easy, Marin said. If it's easy, you're probably not really trying. He looked at her with something like surprise, and then, for the first time since she'd met him, Ezra Thorn smiled, really. Smiled, not just a polite curve of his lips, but something genuine that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face. You're smarter than I gave you credit for, he said. I'm smarter than anyone gives me credit for, Marin replied. I'm just usually too polite to mention it, he laughed then, a rough sound, like he'd forgotten how. And in that moment, driving through the Colorado twilight, with this man who was slowly becoming less of a stranger, Marin felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the tentative, fearful hope of those first days, but something stronger, something real, the sense that maybe, just maybe, this strange marriage of convenience could become something more. December arrived with the first real snow, not the early dusting they'd had in October, but a full storm that blanketed the ranch in white and dropped the temperature 20 degrees overnight. Ezra and the hands worked frantically to finish winter preparations, moving cattle to sheltered areas, storing hay, repairing fences and outbuildings, chopping and stacking firewood, until the pile beside the house stood taller than Marin's head. "Winter here is no joke," Ben told her one afternoon when he came to the house for coffee. "Last year we had a blizzard in November that lasted 3 days. Couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Lost 20 head of cattle that got separated from the herd. How do you prepare for something like that?" Marin asked, pouring him a second cup. "You don't really. You just survive it," Ben grinned. "But the boss is smart about these things. Always has more supplies than he thinks we'll need. Always plans for the worst. That's why Thorn Ranch does better than most places around here." After Ben left, Marin found herself in the pantry, mentally inventorying their supplies against Nell's dire warnings about winter. They had plenty of flour, beans, rice, coffee, salt. The root cellar was full of potatoes, carrots, onions, turnips. Preserved vegetables and fruits lined the shelves. Meat wouldn't be a problem with cattle right outside. But still, the thought of being snowed in for days or weeks made her anxious. What if something happened? What if Josiah got sick? What if you're worrying? Ezra's voice came from behind her. "I can see it in your shoulders," Marin turned. "Ben told me of last year's blizzard." "It sounds terrifying." It was. Ezra leaned against the doorframe. "But we made it through. We always do." He paused. "Having you here will make it easier." Actually, Abigail used to panic during bad storms. Made everything harder. It was the first time he'd mentioned Abigail unprompted, without Marin having to ask. She held very still, afraid to break whatever spell had made him willing to talk. She hated winter, Ezra continued quietly. Hated being isolated, cut off from town. Used to beg me to take her to her parents' house for the season. But I couldn't leave the ranch. His expression was distant, painful, our last winter together. She barely spoke to me. Just stared out the windows like she was in prison. "That must have been hard," Marin said softly. "It was my fault. I knew she wasn't built for this life. But I married her anyway, because I loved her. Thought love would be enough." Ezra's laugh was bitter. "Turns out love isn't enough when you're fundamentally mismatched." She was miserable. I was frustrated, and we just hurt each other. "And then she got pregnant. And then she got pregnant," Ezra echoed. She was terrified. Begged me to take her to Denver for the birth. To a real hospital. But I thought she was overreacting. Thought women had been giving birth on ranches forever. Thought the local midwife was good enough. His voice cracked slightly. I was wrong. Marin crossed the small space between them. Without thinking, took his hand. He looked down at their joined hands with something like surprise. "It wasn't your fault," she said firmly. "Women die in childbirth in hospitals too. You couldn't have known. I should have listened to her. Should have put her fears above my convenience." Ezra's fingers tightened around hers. "I've spent 5 years telling myself I did everything I could. But the truth is, I chose the ranch over her, and she died for it." "You can't know that," Marin insisted. "You can't carry that guilt forever, Ezra. How do you know what I should or shouldn't carry?" The question wasn't hostile, just genuinely curious. Because nobody who loves someone wants them to spend their whole life drowning in guilt. She would want you to be happy, to give Josiah a real home, not a mausoleum. To move forward, Ezra stared at her, his gray eyes intense in the dim pantry light. For a moment, Marin thought he might pull away, might retreat behind his walls, but instead he pulled her closer, wrapped his arms around her in a fierce embrace that took her breath away. He held her like someone drowning holds a lifeline, his face buried in her hair, his breath ragged against her neck. Marin stood frozen for a heartbeat, then slowly wrapped her arms around him, feeling the tension in his shoulders. The barely controlled trembling that spoke of years of held-back emotion. "I'm tired," he whispered against her hair. "I'm so tired of being angry at myself." "Then stop," Marin said simply. "Choose something else. Choose to be here now, with me and Josiah. Choose to build something new instead of protecting something dead." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the pantry, while afternoon light slanted through the high window. It wasn't romantic, exactly. It was rarer than that, more honest. Two damaged people recognizing each other's scars and choosing not to look away. When Ezra finally pulled back, his eyes were red, but clearer somehow, like something had broken free inside him. "Thank you," he said roughly. "For what?" "For not being afraid of the truth. For saying what needs to be said." He touched her face gently, his calloused thumb brushing her cheek. "You're stronger than you look, Maren." "I've had to be," she said, and he nodded, like he understood. After that day, something shifted between them. Ezra stopped disappearing into his study every evening. Instead, he'd sit in the parlor while Maren sewed or read, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. He started telling her stories about his childhood, about his father's struggles to build the ranch, about learning to break horses and mend fences, and read the weather in the mountains. Maren told him about her life too, about growing up in her sister's shadows, about her grandmother, who'd been the only one to see her as more than a disappointment, about the small rebellions that had kept her sane. In a house where she was always wrong. "Your sisters sound terrible," Ezra said one evening. "They're not terrible exactly, just thoughtless. They never meant to be cruel. They just never thought about how their words affected me." Maren set down her mending. "I used to be so angry at them. But now I'm grateful. If they hadn't played that joke, I'd never have come here." "You really mean that?" Yes, and she realized it was true. Whatever hardships this life brought, it was hers in a way her old life never had been. Here she mattered. Here she was building something real. Ezra reached across the space between their chairs, took her hand, a gesture that had become familiar over the past weeks. They sat like that, hands linked, watching the fire burn down to embers. And Maren felt a contentment she'd never known before. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but the possibility of it, the sense that maybe, just maybe, this practical arrangement could transform into something more. The big storm hit in mid-December. The sky turned the color of old bruises, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. Ezra and the hands scrambled to get the cattle into sheltered areas, while Maren prepared the house, filling every container with water, checking lamp oil, pulling out extra blankets. Josiah pressed his face to the window, watching the clouds roll in, his small hands leaving prints on the glass. Maren came up behind him, rested her hand on his shoulder. He looked up at her, a question in his eyes. "It's going to storm," she said gently. "Maybe for a few days. But we're prepared. We'll be safe inside," he nodded, trusting, and returned to watching the sky. The snow started at dusk, big, heavy flakes that quickly turned the world white. By the time Ezra and the hands came in for supper, visibility was down to a few feet. The men ate quickly. Then Ben and the others headed to the bunkhouse, while Ezra secured the barn and checked on the livestock one more time. Maren had hot water ready when he came in, snow crusted on his coat and hat, his face red from cold. "It's bad," he said, strapping off his outer layers. "Going to be a long night." They stayed up late, feeding the fire, listening to the wind howl around the house. Josiah had fallen asleep on the sofa, and Ezra carried him up to bed while Maren banked the coals and locked the doors. When she went upstairs, she found Ezra standing in the hallway, looking lost. "What is it?" she asked. "This is the first major storm since Abigail." His voice was quiet. "I keep waiting to hear her pacing, worrying, making herself sick with fear." "I'm not Abigail," Maren said gently. "No," Ezra agreed, "you're not." He looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You're here. You're steady. You're exactly what I needed." Even though I didn't know it, the words hung between them, whited with meaning. Maren's heart hammered against her ribs. They'd been married for 2 months. But it had been a marriage of convenience, of separate bedrooms and careful distance. This felt like a threshold, a doorway opening to something neither of them had planned for. Ezra, she started, but he closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face. Tell me if you don't want this, he said, his voice rough. Tell me now. Because I'm trying real hard to be a gentleman. But, Maren, She kissed him. It was impulsive, clumsy, and nothing like the chaste peck they'd shared at their wedding. This was need. Wanting two lonely people reaching for something real. Ezra made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, deepening the kiss. And Maren felt something break open inside her chest. Something that had been locked away for so long, she'd forgotten it existed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ezra rested his forehead against hers. I don't want you to think this is just because we're stuck in a storm together, or because I'm lonely. Or, I don't, Maren said. I know what this is, yeah? His hands were still in her hair. What is it? A choice. We're choosing each other, Ezra. Finally, she smiled up at him. We did this marriage backward. Wedding first, everything else after. But maybe that's okay. Maybe that's better even. Ezra kissed her again, slower this time, with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. Come to bed with me, he whispered against her lips. Not because you have to, because you want to, because we're building something here, you and me. And I want, he broke off, struggling for words. I want that too, Maren said simply, hand in hand. They walked to his room, their room now. Outside, the storm raged against the house, burying the world in snow. But inside, in the warmth and the darkness, Maren and Ezra finally became the partners they'd promised to be, not perfectly, not without awkwardness and uncertainty, but with honesty and care, and the beginnings of something that felt dangerously close to love. Afterward, lying in Ezra's arms while the wind howled outside, Maren felt him trace the ring on her finger, Abigail's ring, which had become hers. I need to tell you something, Ezra said quietly about Abigail, about why I really advertised for a wife. Maren stayed quiet, letting him speak in his own time. Everyone thinks I loved Abigail so much I couldn't move on. And I did love her, but... He took a shaky breath. The truth is, by the time she died, we'd made each other miserable. We'd stopped sharing a bed months before she got pregnant, barely spoke except to argue. I was relieved when she stayed with her parents that winter. And I think she was relieved to be away from me, Ezra. Let me finish. His arms tightened around her when she died. I felt guilty, but I also felt free, and that made the guilt even worse. What kind of man feels free when his wife dies? What kind of monster? A human one? Maren interrupted firmly. A human being trapped in an unhappy situation. Feeling relieved doesn't mean you didn't love her. It doesn't make you a monster. I spent 5 years punishing myself, refusing to let anyone close, refusing to move forward, building walls so high nobody could climb them. He turned to look at her in the darkness, and then you showed up. Plain, honest Maren, who didn't expect anything except respect and hard work, who looked at me and saw past all my defenses, to the man I used to be, the man I wanted to be again. I'm not special, Maren whispered. You're exactly what I needed. Ezra kissed her forehead, her cheek, her lips. You're patient and strong. And you don't ask me to be anything I'm not. You make this house feel like a home again. You make Josiah laugh. You make me remember that life is supposed to be more than just surviving. Maren felt tears slip down her temples. Nobody had ever said anything like this to her before. Nobody had ever seen her as essential, as important, as valued. I'm falling in love with you, Ezra said, into the darkness. I know that wasn't the deal. I said this was just practical. But I can't help it. You've gotten under my skin, Maren. And I don't want you out. Good, Maren said through her tears. Because I'm falling in love with you too. And I was terrified you'd never feel the same way. Ezra made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob, and pulled her impossibly closer. They held each other while the storm raged outside, while snow buried the ranch deeper and deeper, while the old life and the new life finally became one life, lived together. When morning came, The world was white, silent, transformed. And in the warmth of their shared bed, Maren and Ezra woke tangled together, no longer strangers, no longer just partners in a practical arrangement, but something more, something real. Something that felt like coming home. The storm lasted 3 days, and by the time it finally blew itself out, the ranch was buried under 4 feet of snow. Ezra and Ben spent hours digging paths to the barn, to the bunkhouse, checking on livestock, making sure the animals had enough food and water. 2 calves had been lost, frozen despite their efforts. And Ezra's jaw was tight with frustration when he came in for dinner the second evening. "Could have been worse," Ben said, stamping snow from his boots. "Remember the winter of '79? We lost 50 head, doesn't make it easier," Ezra muttered. But his hand found Maren's shoulder as he passed. A brief touch that steadied him. She was learning this about him, that he carried losses hard, that he blamed himself for things beyond his control, but that her presence, somehow, made the weight lighter. Josiah was ecstatic about the snow. He'd never seen so much of it, being too young to remember previous winters clearly. Maren bundled him in every warm thing she could find, and let him play outside in short bursts, watching from the window as he threw handfuls of powder into the air, tried to catch snowflakes on his tongue, made snow angels with wild enthusiasm. "He's going to wear himself out," Ezra observed, coming to stand beside her. "Good. Then maybe he'll nap and give us some peace." Maren leaned into his warmth, still marveling at how natural this comes, touching him, being close to him, feeling his arm come around her waist like it belonged there. 3 nights ago, everything had changed. They'd crossed a threshold, and there was no going back. Not that Maren wanted to. "I've been thinking," Ezra said slowly, "about what you said, about selling that south strip to Dalton." He paused, "And I think you're right. It's not prime land, and the money could do a lot of good elsewhere." Maren turned to look at him, surprised. "You're really considering it?" "More than considering. I want you to come with me when I negotiate with him. You've got a head for business, and I want Dalton to know this ranch has 2 people making decisions now. Not just me," the trust implicit in those words, the respect. It made something warm bloom in Maren's chest. "All right," she said. "But you have to teach me how to negotiate like a rancher. I don't know the first thing about it." "You stood up to Lydia Ashford," Ezra pointed out. "That's harder than facing down Dalton any day." They spent that evening in the study, going over figures and strategies. Ezra explained the intricacies of land values, water rights, grazing permits. Maren took notes, asked questions that sometimes made him pause, reconsider his assumptions. "You're better at this than you think," he told her as midnight approached. "You see angles I miss." "That's because I'm used to looking at things sideways," Maren said. "When you're always on the outside, you learn to find unconventional solutions." Ezra studied her across the desk, lamplight casting shadows on his face. "You're not on the outside anymore, Maren. You're the center of this whole operation. You know that, right?" The words made her throat tight. "I'm starting to believe it." He came around the desk, pulled her to her feet, kissed her with a tenderness that still surprised her every time. "Come to bed," he murmured against her lips. "We can finish this tomorrow." Their bedroom, no longer his room, theirs. The place where walls came down completely. Where Ezra told her things he'd never said aloud. His fears about failing his father's legacy. His worries about being a good father to Josiah. His dreams for what the ranch could become. And Maren shared her own secrets. How she'd sometimes stood in front of mirrors as a girl, trying to see what made her sisters beautiful and her plain. How she'd taught herself to find worth in competence, since she couldn't find it in appearance. How she'd almost backed out of boarding that train west. "A dozen times. I'm glad you didn't," Ezra whispered one night, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "I'm glad you were brave enough to take that chance. I wasn't brave. I was desperate." Sometimes that's the same thing. By the time the roads were passable again, nearly 2 weeks had gone by. The enforced isolation had transformed something in all three of them. Josiah had fully accepted Maren as his mother, climbing into their bed in the mornings to snuggle between them, chattering in his silent way about his dreams and plans for the day. Ezra had shed the last remnants of his defensive distance, treating Maren not just as a wife, but as a true partner in every sense. And Maren had stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, had stopped expecting to wake up and find this had all been a dream. That she was still in Missouri, being mocked by her sisters. This was real. This was her life, built on honesty instead of illusion. And it was more than she'd ever dared to hope for. The first trip to town after the storm was an event. Everyone wanted to see how the ranches had fared, to share stories of near disasters and unexpected triumphs. Ezra drove the wagon, Maren beside him. Josiah wedged between them, the three of them bundled against the cold, looking like what they were, a family. The difference in how people treated her was subtle, but unmistakable. Word had spread somehow that Maren Thorne wasn't just keeping house, but was involved in ranch decisions. When they entered the mercantile, Mr. Henderson greeted her by name, asked her opinion on different grades of flour. Women who'd been coolly polite before were warmer, more accepting. Even Lydia Ashford, encountering them on the street, managed a stiff nod of acknowledgement, rather than her usual condescending smile. What changed? Maren asked Ezra quietly, as they loaded supplies into the wagon. You changed. You stopped acting like you had to apologize for existing. Ezra hoisted a sack of grain. People respect confidence. Even out here. Maybe especially out here. Martin Dalton found them at the hardware store, his oily smile firmly in place. Ezra, I heard you weathered the storm well. Only lost a couple head. I understand. News travels fast. Ezra said neutrally. It does indeed. Small town. You know. Dalton's eyes slid to Maren. Mrs. Thorne, lovely to see you again, Mr. Dalton. Maren kept her voice level, actually. We were planning to call on you. My husband and I have a business proposition. Dalton's eyebrows rose. Is that so? The South Strip along Willow Creek, Ezra said. I know you've been wanting to consolidate that area. We're prepared to sell. At the right price. Well now. That is interesting. Dalton's expression turned calculating. Shall we discuss this in my office? Say. Thursday afternoon? Thursday works, Maren said before Ezra could respond. 2 o'clock. Perfect. Dalton tipped his hat. I look forward to it. After he walked away, Ezra squeezed Maren's hand. Look at you, making business appointments. Someone has to manage your schedule, Maren teased. You just grunt and agree to whatever time people suggest. I do not grunt. You absolutely grunt. Ben does an excellent impression, Ezra laughed. That rough sound she'd come to love, and pulled her close right there on the street, not caring who saw. Your trouble, Maren Thorne. You married me, she pointed out. Best decision I ever made. Thursday's meeting with Dalton went better than expected. Maren had spent the intervening days researching land values, talking to Nell about local property sales, even casually questioning Pastor Miller about Dalton's recent purchases. By the time they sat down in Dalton's ostentatious office, she knew exactly what that strip of land was worth to him. Dalton started with a lowball offer. As expected, Ezra began to counter, but Maren put a hand on his arm. Mr. Dalton, she said pleasantly, that land connects your 2 largest parcels and gives you direct water access year-round. It's worth at least double what you're offering. And we both know it. Dalton's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Thorne, perhaps you don't understand land values in this territory. I understand them perfectly. I also understand you're trying to consolidate holdings before the railroad expansion next year. That land becomes significantly more valuable once the rails come through. She smiled sweetly. We can either negotiate a fair price now, or we can wait and see what other buyers might offer. Once the railroad announces its route, Ezra was very still beside her. but she could feel his approval radiating through the contact of their arms. Dalton stared at her for a long moment, then laughed. "Well played, Mrs. Thorne. I see Ezra's found himself quite a partner." He named a new figure, much closer to their target price. They haggled for another 20 minutes. Marin, holding firm, while Ezra backed her up until they reached an agreement that was actually favorable to the ranch. Dalton drew up papers on the spot, and they left his office with a bank draft that would fund the irrigation improvements Marin had suggested weeks ago. "That was incredible," Ezra said as soon as they were outside. "Where did you learn to negotiate like that?" "I didn't. I just paid attention to what you've been teaching me, and I used the same skills I'd developed dealing with my sisters. Reading people, finding their pressure points, staying calm when they try to intimidate you." Marin tucked the bank draft carefully into her reticule. "Dalton thought he could dismiss me because I'm a woman. That was his mistake." Ezra stopped walking, pulled her into his arms right there on the sidewalk, kissed her thoroughly despite the scandalized looks from passing townspeople. "Have I mentioned lately that I love you?" "Not since this morning," Marin said breathlessly. "Well, I do. You're brilliant and fierce, and you make me better than I am alone." He kissed her again. "Come on. Let's go home, home." The word settled over Marin like a warm blanket. Thorne Ranch was home now. Truly, completely, not just a place she lived, but a place she belonged. Winter deepened its grip on the territory. More storms came, though none as severe as that first one. The ranch settled into a different rhythm, smaller tasks, indoor work, long evenings by the fire. Ezra taught Marin to play chess, and she beat him within a month. Much to his mock outrage, Josiah learned through simple words, proud of every small accomplishment, his vocabulary expanding daily. Though still only in writing, never spoken. Letters arrived from Missouri in early February. Marin's mother wrote regularly now, sharing news, asking questions about ranch life with genuine interest. Her father's single letter was stiff and formal, but included a sentence that made Marin's throat tight. "I am pleased to hear you have found your place in the world." Her sisters wrote too, a joint letter that began with apologies and ended with curiosity about the West. Vivienne had become engaged to a banker's son. Cordelia was being courted by 3 different men and couldn't decide between them. Lillian asked if there were any eligible ranchers in Colorado Territory, as she was dreadfully bored with Missouri society. "Your sisters want to visit next summer," Ezra observed, reading over her shoulder. "Would you mind?" "It's your home too, Marin." "Invite whoever you want," he paused, "though I admit, I'm curious to meet these women who were foolish enough to think they were better than you. They were beautiful. Are beautiful, so are you." Ezra turned her to face him. "When are you going to believe that?" "I'm not beautiful, Ezra. I've accepted that. But I'm valuable anyway. And that's better, you're wrong." He cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. "You're beautiful because you're real. Because you're strong and smart and kind. Because when you smile at Josiah, your whole face lights up. Because when you're thinking hard about something, you bite your bottom lip just a little." He kissed her gently. "Because you make this house feel alive. I see you, Marin, all of you, and you're the most beautiful thing I've ever known." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "You're just saying that because you love me. I love you because it's true." March arrived with a whisper of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing brown grass beneath, and the promise of green to come. One morning, Marin woke feeling strange, slightly dizzy, faintly nauseous. She blamed it on something she'd eaten, and went about her day. But the feeling persisted. By the 3rd morning, realization began to dawn. She waited another week, to be sure. Then another week trying to figure out how to tell Ezra. She was excited, but also terrified. Memories of Abigail's death haunted the edges of her happiness. Finally, one evening as they were preparing for bed, she just blurted it out, "I'm pregnant." Ezra froze, mid-motion. shirt half unbuttoned. What? I'm pregnant. I think. I'm almost certain. Marin twisted her hands together. I know it's sooner than we probably should have. I mean, we've only been really married for a few months. And with what happened to Abigail. I know you're probably. Ezra crossed the room in 3 strides, pulled her into his arms, held her so tightly she could barely breathe. A baby, he said, his voice rough with emotion. We're having a baby. You're not upset? Upset? He pulled back to look at her, and his eyes were wet, Marin. You've given me everything, a real home, a partner, a reason to wake up happy. And now a child. How could I be anything but grateful? But Abigail, you're not Abigail, Ezra said firmly. And this time, I'm doing everything right. We're going to Denver for the birth. I'm hiring the best doctor money can buy. I'm not taking any chances with you. That's expensive. I don't give a damn about the expense. You're more important than money. More important than this ranch. More important than anything. He cupped her face in his hands. I'm not losing you, Marin. I can't. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. His intensity should have been frightening, but instead it made Marin feel safe, protected, cherished in a way she'd never experienced before. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. But we'll be scared together, and we'll get through it together. Ezra kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. You're strong. Remember? Strong enough to cross the country alone. Strong enough to build a life from nothing. Strong enough to handle anything. That night they lay awake, talking about the future, about names and nurseries, about whether Josiah would be excited or jealous, about all the ways their life was about to change again. Ezra kept one hand on Marin's still flat stomach, as if he could protect the tiny life growing there. Through sheer force of will, when they finally slept, it was tangled together, holding each other against the darkness and the fear and the beautiful uncertainty of what was coming. Josiah took the news with the enthusiasm only a 5-year-old could muster. He'd had a birthday in January. Kie, just family, but momentous because it marked another year of growth, another year closer to the boy he was becoming. A baby? He gestured wildly. Eyes bright. I'm going to be a big brother? Yes, Marin said, laughing despite her nerves. If that's all right with you? He nodded so vigorously his curls bounced. Then he did something that made Marin's breath catch. He placed both small hands on her stomach, gently, carefully, and his mouth moved, forming words. Silent, but clear. I'll protect you. That's what he was saying. Marin could read it on his lips. Ezra saw it too, pulled Josiah into a fierce hug. You're going to be the best big brother, he said roughly. I know it. The ranch hands were congratulations and concern in equal measure. Ben pulled Ezra aside one day, and Marin overheard their conversation from the kitchen window. Boss, you sure you want to be doing this? After what happened with, I'm sure, Ezra cut him off. And this time it'll be different. We're taking every precaution. She's a good woman, Marin. Hate to see anything happen. Nothing's going to happen, Ezra said fiercely. I won't let it. As spring arrived in earnest, painting the mountains with wildflowers, filling the air with the sound of newborn calves, Marin felt her body changing. She grew rounder, slower, tired more easily. Ezra hovered constantly, trying not to be obvious about it, but watching her like she might shatter at any moment. I'm not made of glass, she told him one afternoon, when he physically removed a laundry basket from her hands. I know. But humor me anyway. Ezra set the basket aside. I need to feel like I'm doing something. So I let you fuss, Marin finished. Because beneath the fussing is love. And I can live with that. By June, when her sisters arrived for their promised visit, Marin was 6 months along, and glowing with health. Despite her fears, she watched the wagon approach with mixed emotions. Excitement, anxiety, curiosity about how they'd changed. Vivian stepped down first, looking around with wide eyes. Good Lord, Marin, it's so vast. Cordelia followed, her pretty face awed. I never imagined it would be this beautiful. Lillian was last, and she ran straight to Marin, threw her arms around her, careful of the pregnant belly between them. "Look at you," she whispered. "You're pregnant. And you look so happy." "I am," Maren said simply. Her sister's visit was transformative in ways none of them expected. They threw themselves into ranch life with surprising enthusiasm, learning to gather eggs, help in the kitchen, listening with fascination as Maren explained ranch operations and cattle management. They were hopeless at most physical tasks, but they tried, and their genuine effort went a long way toward healing old wounds. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Vivian spoke quietly. "I'm sorry, Maren, for everything, for the joke, for all the years of making you feel small, for being too blind and selfish to see what was right in front of us. We thought we were so clever," Cordelia added, "sending you out here to be humiliated. But you weren't humiliated. You thrived. You became someone. Amazing, someone we should have seen all along," Lillian finished. Maren felt tears prick her eyes. "I forgave you a long time ago. That joke gave me this life. Ezra, Josiah, the ranch, all of it. I should be thanking you." "No," Vivian said firmly. "You should never have needed that cruelty to find your worth. We robbed you of years of confidence, years of knowing you were valuable. That's not something to thank us for." They sat in silence for a moment, watching Ezra and Josiah in the distance. Working with one of the horses, Ezra looked up, caught Maren's eye, smiled. That rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. "He loves you," Cordelia observed. "Really loves you. Not just married because it's practical. Loves you. I love him too," Maren said. "More than I knew it was possible to love anyone." "You're lucky," Lillian said wistfully. "You found what most people spend their whole lives searching for." "I found it because I stopped searching," Maren corrected. "I stopped trying to be something I wasn't. Stopped apologizing for existing. Stopped measuring myself against impossible standards. And once I did that, I could see what was really valuable." Her sisters stayed for 2 weeks, and by the time they left, something had shifted. Between the 4 Bennett sisters, they would never be what they might have been if they'd grown up treating each other with kindness. But they'd found a new understanding, a fresh start built on honesty, instead of hierarchy. The summer passed in a golden haze. Maren's belly grew round and heavy, but she remained strong, healthy, defying all the fears that haunted them. Ezra kept his promise. As her time approached, they made the journey to Denver, leaving Josiah in Nessie's capable care. They took rooms in a hotel near the hospital, and Ezra hired not 1 but 2 doctors to attend the birth. When labor started on a cool September evening, exactly 1 year after their wedding, Ezra paced the hospital corridor like a caged animal. The doctors tried to send him away, but he refused to leave. Planted himself outside the birthing room door, with the immovable determination of a man who'd made a promise to himself. Inside, Maren labored through the night, thinking about Abigail, about all the women who'd come before, about the thin line between life and death that childbirth represented. But she also thought about Ezra waiting outside, about Josiah back at the ranch, about the life she'd built and refused to leave behind. When her daughter finally arrived with the dawn, squalling and perfect and alive, Maren wept with relief and joy and sheer exhaustion. The doctor brought Ezra in, and he stood at the bedside, staring at his wife and new daughter, with an expression of such profound gratitude. It made the nurses tear up. "She's perfect," he breathed. "You're perfect." "You did it, Maren. We did it," Maren corrected, placing the tiny bundle in his arms. Together, they named her Abigail Grace, Abigail for the mother Josiah never knew. Grace for the grace that had brought Maren to Colorado and into Ezra's life. The name felt right, a bridge between past and future, honoring what was lost while celebrating what had been found. When they brought Abigail Grace home 3 weeks later, Josiah was beside himself. He'd helped Nello prepare the nursery, practiced being quiet, made a solemn vow to be the best big brother in all of Colorado Territory. The ranch hands lined up to meet the new addition, each one more awkward and sweet than the last. Ben carved a tiny wooden rattle. Pete presented a small blanket his wife had made. Sam offered a silver dollar. For her future, he said shyly. That night, with Abigail Grace sleeping in her cradle, and Josiah finally settled in his own bed, Marin and Ezra stood at the window, watching moonlight silver the landscape. Ezra's arms were around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For being brave enough to get on that train. For giving me a second chance at everything. At love. At family. At being the man I wanted to be." He turned her to face him. "For seeing past the walls to the person underneath. For making this house a home. For giving me Josiah's laughter and Abigail Grace. And the best year of my life." "Just 1 year," Marin teased gently. "The first of many," Ezra amended. "The first of a lifetime." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. Outside, wind whispered through the grass. Night birds called to each other. Inside, their children slept safe and warm. And the house that had been so silent and sad just 1 year ago was full of life and love and hope. Marin thought about the girl she'd been, plain, overlooked. Convinced of her own inadequacy. That girl had boarded a train west expecting humiliation, and had found transformation instead. She'd discovered that beauty wasn't about symmetrical features or golden hair. It was about being fully alive. Fully yourself. She'd learned that love didn't require perfection. It required honesty, effort, and the courage to be vulnerable. She'd found that home wasn't a place you were born, but a place you created, brick by brick, choice by choice, with people who saw your worth even when you couldn't see it yourself. The mail-order bride who'd arrived in Colorado as a joke had become the heart of Thorn Ranch. The ugly daughter had discovered she was beautiful after all, not despite her plainness, but because of everything underneath it. The woman nobody wanted had become the woman someone couldn't live without. And as Ezra held her close, while moonlight painted their bedroom silver, as their daughter slept peacefully, and their son dreamed of horses and adventure, as the ranch settled in for the night all around them, Marin Thorn finally understood what her grandmother had tried to tell her. All those years ago, beauty wasn't something you were born with, it was something you became. When you stopped hiding and started living. When you stopped apologizing and started belonging. When you opened your heart to love and let someone love you back. Exactly as you were, she was enough. She had always been enough. She would always be enough. The ranch stretched out around them in the darkness. 3,000 acres of possibility and promise. The mountains stood sentinel in the distance, eternal and unchanging. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. And in one ranch house, in Colorado territory, in one bedroom, where moonlight slanted through the window, two people who'd started as strangers held each other close and marveled at the beautiful life they'd built, from honesty and hope, and the courage to take a chance on love. Together, forever home.